Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, high school teacher in Los Angeles that started this podcast. Let me just adjust my mic a little bit. Started this podcast 2 years ago with the hopes of getting viewpoint diversity. So the idea of Cylinder Radio is from one side, it's just a circle. From the other side, it's just a rectangle. But the truth is it's three dimensions. It's very complex. And my guest today, I'm really excited to talk to. He's of Mexican heritage. He's a veteran. He's a the 2020, I believe, Social Worker of the Year.
Yes.
A transgender man. I mean, there's a whole bunch of kind of like categories. But Zander Keig is here. Zander, we had a conversation, and I was thinking like, okay, now what do I use you for like my audience and things like that? I was like, there's just so many things. And what I'm going to title this is Individual Courage. And it's not just because you are trans. You're the sixth, I think, guest that I've had that's a transgender person. And I wouldn't say that and we were just talking about this, but I wouldn't say that all transgender people are courageous just because they're trans or they're black or they're white or they're whatever it is, like just because of that. But when we get into who you are, what you've done, and what you continue to do, I think it fits the definition of courage. And the way I explain it to my kids, my 6 and 4-year-old, is courage is it's not that you're not you don't have fear. It's just you have what you believe to be right, and there's fear between you and what you believe to be right, and you say, I'm going to go through the fear to do what I believe to be right, even if it's not popular, even if it's scary, all that kind of stuff. And just having met you briefly, I think you hold that as well as anybody that I've ever met. So thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Well, and thank you for inviting me. I'm also very much looking forward to this topic because it's really not one that I've had the opportunity to discuss with anybody else. It's more something I might discuss in private with friends or with my wife or, a coach. This isn't a topic that I've heard many people talk about, so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah. So as I said, we just talk about like transgender issue first, but then I want to talk about a lot of other things. But I've had, like I said, you're my 6th transgender guest, and very diverse people. Very diverse within the trans community. Some view themselves as activists. Some view themselves not as activists at all. Different opinions when it comes to sports and all that kind of stuff. I just had Mac Beggs on, and who's an athlete, has a very specific stance on that. Why do you think it is that, aside from Corinna Cohn, who I had on, most of the people that I have on who are willing to come on a show like this are trans men who are, I guess the term is like passing. Like you're one that when I met you, Zander, I met you and I heard that you were a trans man. And I was like, wait, hold on. So I had to Google it while we were talking on Zoom. I had a window open Googling to see if this was actually the case, because no one would really tell, or very few people could even tell. Do you think that there's something to that the people who are willing to talk about the nuance and the complexities and stuff like that fit into this kind of category, or is that just a coincidence? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, within the transgender community or for those of us who live, quote, under the transgender umbrella, right? People might use this term transgender in many different ways. Some people liken it to an actual personal identity, some people to a label for a community. I mean, I don't call myself transgender. I refer to myself as transsexual. And so I think the people that would fit into a category similar to me, people who have medically transitioned, meaning taken hormones, for a long enough period of time that it has now deepened my voice and made a bunch of facial hair sprout on my face and made a bunch of my hair on my top of my head fall off. For those who are just listening through an auditory, means of a podcast, it's like that's because of the hormones. And so the hormones are very powerful. I mean, testosterone is a powerful hormone. And so with all the testosterone in my system, it brings these secondary sex characteristics. And so now when I'm interacting with the world, when I'm out in public, they see and hear what they see and hear, right now with me. And so that's going to frame how people perceive me and how they treat me. And so perhaps other people that you've talked to that have a similar experience to me have had a historical experience that's similar, which is that when I was a very masculine presenting woman in lesbian community, I encountered more hostile or more contemptuous or more confusing responses from general public, right? People who were strangers to me. When I was, say, accessing a bathroom or just walking down the sidewalk, and somebody would yell out the window, "You effing dyke," or something like that, right? That would happen more often than is fun, right? And so now my masculinity, which there's no difference in the way I express my masculinity, it's just that now it matches the sound and the look of a man versus a woman. And so I get less pushback, and well, at least from mainstream society. I get a lot more pushback now from within LGBT community that I didn't get before. But what's interesting is that perhaps it's because this amount of pushback from society that gave me the opportunity to spend more time considering, excuse me, and contemplating, who am I? What do I want to do in the world? How do I want to be? Who can I be? Like, what are the options for me? If I felt any sort of limitations, a lot of those limitations were maybe even self-imposed, but they were lifted. And so I know a lot of people that I interact with that's true for them too. I don't know if, people that have been your guests, but it's like when all of a sudden I wasn't having to, so quote unquote, battle the world and walk around like I had a big, shield in front of me, a heavy coat of armor. Then it freed me up to explore aspects of my life and my interactions in the world in a very different way. And so now there's more of a sense of ease about it. And when I can experience life with more of a sense of ease, emotionally, that's going to then transfer into maybe how I interact with other people. And I might have easier conversations. I might have easier access to friendships, right? And so that's going to make me more, that's going to be more resiliency. And then that's going to make it possible for me to come onto a podcast where maybe the person who's interviewing, I'm not saying you, but the person who's interviewing me or the person who are listening might not be as welcoming or as friendly, right? Because I don't need that from you. I have it. But I didn't have it before I transitioned because I felt so under the gun constantly of having to confront that contempt or that confusion or that anger in people's faces. I literally just saw it in their faces, looks of disgust or confusion. And that starts to wear on you. That when you hear people say microaggressions, right? That would probably fit that definition. I don't talk that way, but that would fit that definition probably of the 1,000 cuts a day, so to speak, right?
That makes a lot of sense, Zander. Yeah, like, I mean, if you are like a trans woman, but you look very masculine, but you have a wig on or long hair and stuff like that, but it just, you get so much different looks and everything like that all day long that you might have, like, that's a great, you really hit the nail on the head helping me to understand this. It's like you have this armor up. Yeah, so to come on a podcast where it's like, well, let's talk about everything. It's like, I'm just tired of just I have these walls up just for my personal, like, safety in some ways, or just like my this ease of thought. There's so much conflict daily just as I go to the store to get a cup of coffee that I'm just maybe not in the mood to dive into it the same way or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a clear example. I did have a conversation with a trans woman many years ago. It's probably been a decade now, who would, in the language that you used a little earlier, would pass, right, so to speak, right, would be seen as a woman. No problem. Nobody would think, well, maybe some people might think, is that a trans woman? But for the most part, they could just walk around. They had been on hormones a long time, but they wore blue jeans, they wore running shoes, t-shirts, they had short hair, and they didn't wear makeup. And they were describing their experience of how people were treating them. And I thought about it for a minute, and I turned to them and I said, I think people think you're a dyke, because that's how I used to be treated. And she started to cry, and other people at the table, it was a community affair, other people at the table told me that I was being transphobic. I'm like, no, this person, this trans person, in my opinion, was experiencing homophobia, not transphobia. And I wasn't being transphobic. I was actually trying to say, like, oh, I encountered all of those things when I was a masculine presenting woman that I don't encounter now. You didn't encounter them before, but now you are. Perhaps it's because they think you're a dyke. And by the way, this person was in a long-term relationship with a woman. So I don't know why they were upset and offended. You know, like, it's like they clearly see you as a female. My impression is they did see her as a female, and they were just treating her like they treat masculine women.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, and then you get labeled that way. I mean, you know, I had people say, like, well, why do you bring on, I brought on someone, I was talking about like the Israel conflict, and I brought on a Muslim guy who, you know, became like a pro-Israel person. And I had someone be like, well, why do you always bring on these people who don't fit like the common narrative? Like, if you want to bring on a trans person, bring in someone who toes the line and had, you know, blah, 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 thinks this way, votes this way, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, the whole point is to celebrate individuals and the awesome ways that we are all unique as human beings. And it's not as interesting to say, oh, this person fits these markers racially or gender-wise or whatever it is, so they are going to fit what we all assume they fit in with how they think. And that's just not interesting to me. I think it's more important to realize that we are individuals and we are all unique. And that's really fun to get to know people as people and not make all of these assumptions about it. And I think you fit that really well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm very heterodox in my thinking, and that is not considered to be falling in line with what would be perceived of as, you know, like a mainstream transgender or trans point of view or sentiment. But I don't even think that's accurate. I think that there's a certain message that individuals may be getting from trans, let's say, nonprofit organizations, which are doing tremendous work. And, you know, they have a marketing and PR department that has to push out messages. And then you've got LGBT organizations that are also going to have, you know, internal mandates to make sure that they're pushing out information that's trans specific, and they're probably going to fall in line with a, you know, what would be considered acceptable. And where do they get these ideas for what's acceptable? Well, probably they're trans employees who are most likely thinking that that's you know, that's all they see around them. So that must be what's true and what's accurate and what people are asking for. And it's also maybe what people are going to see on the Twitter accounts of certain trans people. But when you go to, say, a conference where it's, you know, if not 100%, nearly 100% of the people that are attending and presenting at those conferences are trans, that's where you see that we're not a monolith, that we do have very, very divergent ideas and opinions about everything from how trans healthcare should be run to, you know, politics and, you know, how we should treat religion and religious ideas. Because we come from so many different backgrounds. We come from, right, there are trans Muslim people, and there are trans Catholics, and there are trans people who are really wealthy, but maybe were raised in poverty, and vice versa, right? Maybe not as many as that. But, you know, we have trans people of all different different political and religious and class affiliations. And so that's going to show up when people are exposed to a wider audience of trans people from different geographic locations, different age groups, different education levels. And so it doesn't surprise me that there are many, many more people who not think like me, but think differently and are okay with it. Then there are people who are all in agreement. I haven't really thought it out very much, but I did write down on a piece of paper a few days ago. It's just this on a blank piece of paper: trans group think, because I think that might be what's transpiring, is that we're in that stage of group dynamics within a community of developing as a group, where we're kind of stuck in some group think. And that's not going to be good for us. Right. That can be as disastrous as the Spaceship Challenger explosion. And it's just not good. It's not good for group development, whether that be a group at work or an affinity group.
So is something that you're trying to do, bring like highlight those diverse voices from within the community, or within, like, how do we do that? How do we get it out? I mean, I would say, like, have a podcast, but like, how do you get it out that whatever your identity markers are, you are still free to be a heterodox thinker? Because I had a student who's in 10th grade, well, he's going in 11th now, but we were talking about something in class, US history class, about civil rights or something like that. He raised his hand. He said, yeah, it's really frustrating because he's gay. He's like, that now, because like I'm out of the closet gay, I have to think this way politically, and I have to support this thing now, and I have to support that thing now. And I was like, no, you don't. No, you don't. He's like, but there's so much pressure to like think like a gay guy, and which has a lot less to do with like who you're attracted to, and a lot more to do with your politics. Kind of like that Ayanna Pressley thing. If you're, for Black voices, you need to vote for Black voices and stuff like that. And I just don't think that's accurate, and I don't think it's positive. So what do we? I'm assuming that you're kind of on board with that kind of thinking. So what do we do? Or am I off base?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think if the idea is that we get our messages about how we should be as people, and let's say as a gay person, you get the message from, Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. Like that's it. Those are your 5 choices for how to be a gay man. Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to be okay. That's going to fit for some, but it's not going to fit for others. And so there have to be more examples of that. And I can tell you that I haven't really gone out of my way to be to emerge as a heterodox thinker within the trans community necessarily. I do actually have many, many friends who are similarly minded, but do it in different ways, and they are active in that world. And bless them, because that is that's like a nonstop deluge of toxicity that they have to wade through, and it's really unfortunate for them. But bravo, and brava, right, for the trans women. But I do it in social work. So in the ways in which I've teamed up with another social worker who lives in Utah, and he's a Mormon, right? He's a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and he works for the Church of Latter-day Saints as a social worker. And he and I paired up after participating on a bulletin board for social workers, where the topics, it was about 2 to 2.5 years ago, people were bringing up the topics of 3 topics that were the most controversial. Can you be a conservative and a social worker? Can you be a Christian and a social worker? And I think maybe the third one was kind of like a combination of those things, right? Maybe it was just, can you be a Republican? And the majority of the voices were like, absolutely not. But then, of course, you had these social workers who came in and said, well, I'm a Catholic, I'm a social worker, I work for this Catholic organization or this Catholic hospital, and I'm doing social work. And I actually got my master's of social work degree at a Catholic university, or I work at a Baptist hospital and I got my degree at a Baptist school, or, Brigham Young, they get it at a Mormon school. Mm-hmm. So it's like, the first question, of course, is, well, would you ever say, can you be Jewish and a social worker? Can you be Hindu and a social worker? Can you be Muslim? Like, how can it ever seem okay to ask if a Christian can be a social worker? Like, that's just ludicrous in my mind. The other thing is to say, can you be a conservative? Well, I mean, what is a conservative, and what do they mean by that, right? And do they literally mean a person who wants to conserve tradition and certain ideas about the family? Can they be a social worker? Well, absolutely, they could be a social worker. Like, that's not a question. But when the question did arise, then what happened was the onslaught of negativity was, if you're a conservative, then you can't be a social worker because you're not following the social work code of ethics. It's like, in what way? Because if you read the social work code of ethics, it says that we shouldn't discriminate or marginalize voices that are divergent from our own, and political association or affiliation is one of those categories, that, along with sexual orientation and race, right? So it's like, we're not supposed to do it to our clients, and we're not supposed to do it to each other, right? And so it seems to me that those people are violating the code of ethics by trying. And so he and I found ourselves on this group going, well, on this listserv, going back and forth with, like, this doesn't make any sense. Excuse me. And so we got together off the list and decided to talk about, like, I'm so sorry, how can we I don't know, find a way to make room for these other social workers. And so we've been, for the last 2 years now, we've been working on a book project that has multiple chapter authors, and we're constantly getting new chapter authors and getting these great chapters contributed to the book. We're working on developing a podcast. So we're going to put this idea forward that there is a diversity of viewpoint. And the book isn't just filled with people who are social workers who happen to be Christians and conservatives. It's all aspects of diversity, because we want to show that. We want this book to be able to be used in a social work school, so that social work students can learn that not only is there a divergence of thought within the profession, but it's also going to be exemplified within your patient population as well, right? The clients you work with are not all going to be subscribing or ascribing to your notions. And we're not supposed to think that anyway, because we're supposed to think, right, foundational to social work is meet people where they are, right? Meet people where they are. And so and it's not to, like, then pick them up and carry them to where we want them to be. That's not the goal, right? But some people, I think, take that line of reasoning, which is, and it's very elitist in a sense of, like, well, these poor people don't really understand that they're making an error in judgment, so, I'll educate them while trying to get them housing or get them into substance use treatment. It's very paternalistic, or maternalistic as it would be with social work. It's majority female occupation, but it's just I am particularly do not fall into that type of social work. And I think a lot of social workers don't, but it was clear on that list that people were very, very not okay with there being religious, Christian religious, or conservative political social workers.
It's very fascinating because social work, I mean, I'm assuming that it's like you'd lean progressive because you're thinking about getting things to progress, be better, ideas of, like, social justice and stuff like that. But Christianity, I mean, at the very core, if you follow actually, like, the words of, like, Jesus, like, it's very much like helping the poor and doing, helping those who can't help themselves and all that kind of stuff. Why is it, do you think, because I would say that political ideological viewpoint diversity is really important, because there's certain things that more liberal minded people tend to lean in toward, and conservative minded people, and they both have value. Like, maybe a conservative might be more conscientious about certain things and maybe more organized or something along those lines. So we do need both. But why do you think it is that so many, even though there is a mix, as you pointed out, but why do you think that the balance is more on the left end of it, and you are more center right, correct?
Yeah, I would definitely consider myself a centrist or a moderate that leans more, quote, conservative, in that like non-political sense. So for example, when we think of a progressive, right? When
Mhm.
we think about not even a progressive, when we think about progress,
Yeah.
right? I feel like there are two. There's probably more than two, but I feel like there are probably two dominant concepts within progress. One would be to build up, right? To strengthen, and one would be to tear down, right? To destroy, to deconstruct,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so a person who is for progress, who wants to tear things down, wants to deconstruct things, is going to dismantle family. And you've got people who are pro progress, who want to build up, they want to strengthen, they want to fortify family, right? So you got one group that wants to fortify family, another that wants to completely dismantle the structure of the nuclear family,
Yeah,
right?
why do they want to do that? Like if you're trying to argue like steel man their position, why? Because that doesn't seem like a good idea to me. But I hear it often.
I think it's because there are some people who who feel and have experienced, I
Mhm.
would imagine firsthand, some aspects of the enforcement and or reinforcement of the nuclear family in ways that was perhaps psychologically or maybe even physically harmful to them.
Mhm.
So for example, the gay or lesbian person who gets excommunicated from their
Yeah.
church, right? And why is that? Because the expectation is they're going to be heterosexual, they're going to marry, and they're going to reproduce, right? They're going to fulfill God's law or something like
Yeah.
that, right? So I think that's part of it. I think other parts of it can be that you have just adults who are in gay and lesbian relationship, or perhaps they're bisexual, but they're in a same-sex relationship, and they're rejected by their family. They feel isolated from their peer group at work because everybody is sitting around, or at least pre-COVID, everybody was sitting around the water cooler talking about, you know, their spouses and before there was same-sex marriage was legalized, people might have not felt safe or comfortable or welcome to chime in with, oh, me and my wife, we did this, or me and my partner, we did this. And so people have felt harmed by this, this
Institution or
yeah, the
something.
institute,
Yeah.
right, because instead of like this idea of institutionalized versus systemic, so like the institutionalization of heterosexuality was that gay and lesbian people didn't have access to legal marriage,
Right.
right? And so
Right.
now it's legalized, so the institutionality is gone, but it's still pervasive systemically in the sense that it's socially, there's still a lot of people who don't accept same-sex marriage.
Right.
They don't care that it's legal, they still don't accept it. And so there are some people who are going to say, well, that's okay. They're entitled to their opinions, their beliefs. I'm going to go get married. And I'm going to raise my family and I'm going to live my good life. And they're going to do what they do. But there are other people who are going to be really angry about the fact that their family doesn't accept them, or their church doesn't accept them, and or their temple or their mosque. Let's not kid ourselves. It's not just Christianity, right? And
Mhm.
so let's just say that harm that they have maybe internalized, maybe that's a way to talk about it. They've internalized the harm. It's been so devastating to their life that instead of making the decision to go off and live their good life, their focus is, I'm going to tear down their
Right.
lives.
Right.
They've torn my life apart, so I'm going tit for tat. I'm going to tear down there. I'm going to de-emphasize the nuclear family. I'm going to call straight people breeders. That was real popular in the 90s, right?
Mhm.
That's a way to humiliate and to just sort of name call back. It's like, it's not very mature, but you can imagine that somebody who's been so harmed or has internalized a sense of harm might be a little immature because developmentally maybe they have stalled because they've felt this onslaught. So it's not as if I don't understand, and I might not even, I'm not capturing every reason why. I want to be
No,
clear
but
with that. I just think that maybe those might be some of the more common or the more visible. It's like when a national organization says, dismantle the nuclear family, it might be because they adhere to a more like communal or communistic way
mhm.
of breaking down the family in that way. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. There's a lot of different reasons why. But if I'm for progress, I'm for the kind of progress that builds up, strengthens, and fortifies. I'm not for the kind of progress that destroys, dismantles, deconstructs, and tears down.
Yeah, I think it's like the people who are recovering alcoholics and they say, you can't drink around me, as opposed to like I need to control myself and just say I'm not going to do that. Now the whole world has to change to bend for me instead of me bending for the world, and that's like more extreme for like the world, but that makes sense. And when you say like deconstruction, I talk about a lot of this critical social justice stuff. I say it's like a demolition crew, and it's just a couple of people with sledgehammers can rip down a house. Well, we don't need a demolition crew. We need a renovation crew. And a renovation crew has like maybe one person with a sledgehammer, but it also has electricians and it has masons and it has all of these people to build up. So I'm right in line with you of like we might need to take away certain things that aren't working, but then have something to replace it with right away. You got to do the Indiana Jones switch quick. You don't tear down and then basically say like we'll figure it out. That seems like a terrible plan.
Well, I think you and I are both then in agreement. It sounds like that we believe that either the frame or the foundation, something is worth salvaging.
Yeah.
But perhaps we need to completely renovate, right? We need to renovate the exterior, or maybe we need to renovate all the interior of the house, or maybe we need to strip it down to its frame and rebuild. Like, absolutely, right? Build up, rebuild, absolutely. Now, but the argument would be that the foundation or the frame is bad, right? That's where the tear it down, deconstruct it, is that the foundation and or the frame are bad.
Yeah, well, it was built with, let's say, like we go very metaphor and very meta here, but it's like
Yeah.
it was built with slave labor. Yeah, but now or like whatever that kind of labor, but then their grandkids get to live in this house too.
Well, there's also the focus, right? Like, I'm an optimist, so my mind immediately went to, yeah, let's strip it down to its frame, and then let's admire and let's tell the whole world about the craftsmanship
Yeah.
of those laborers,
Yeah.
right? It was beautiful. Look at what they did. Look at
Yeah.
in 18 blah blah blah. Look at how that house is still standing, right? So there's a way to reframe it, right? That's a fairly common social work strategy, or even just psychotherapy, is to reframe something. And so, metaphorically speaking, again, a reframe of a frame would be to highlight. It's like, yes, the people who poured the concrete for that foundation did so because they were ordered to do it. And they were beautiful masons. Look at that. Nobody can do it like that anymore. No one. Carpenters, right? The carpentry of that frame is you can't reproduce that unless it's a master craftsman, right? They don't build houses like that anymore. So that is a way. And I think you could do both things. You can say skilled laborers, forced to labor, beautiful job. Right? I think you could do both. I don't think we need to. Why tear down a beautiful frame?
Yeah. 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 It's almost like disrespectful to the people that did that work.
Well, have you heard about the family of there's this statue of, I believe it's Eisenhower on a horse, and standing next to him is an African American. I'm not sure if they're in uniform or not. I haven't heard those details, but they were trying to either destroy the statue and or have it removed. And the family of the black man standing next to the president on the horse. I think it was, maybe he wasn't president yet. He was maybe still just a military officer. That they're like, no, don't destroy that. Don't remove that. That's our forefather. Like,
Yeah.
that's our family there. Right. So the if the meta narrative was tear it down, it reflects poorly on the country and it's a terrible history. Then you've got the family members going all the way back, coming up to the current time going, no, please don't do that.
Yeah.
Please leave that up there. We are so proud of that member of our family.
Yeah, to be
I
next
don't
to
even
the
know what that,
president, immortalizing
yeah,
a statue. No one in my family is next to a president
no.
statue. Yeah.
Clearly they did something to earn
Right.
them that placement. I don't know what it is. I probably have never done it or come close to it. I think that's something worth honoring. That's something worth restoring, and that's something worth sharing with children in our history classes, or
Yeah, let's
when they
learn
go
about
on
yeah.
walks around the Capitol and showing it to them.
Let's learn about who he was and what made him immortalized in a statue, and it's a learning opportunity, which is
I wish I remembered where he was, where that statue is in front of. I believe it is Washington, D.C., but I think it is, but I don't know what it's in front of. It's like it's in front of the Smithsonian or some sort of governmental building,
yeah. There
although I
was
think,
one of Teddy Roosevelt and a Native American also that sounds similar. But we're gonna actually Tarantino this a little bit because
okay.
I wanted to get into it, Xander, with you, just like right off the bat. But like, can you just like tell your story a little bit? Just like what got you? I mean, now you're in this position where you're very well respected and accomplished in your field of social work. But you were also a veteran. You've lived quite a life. Like what I guess like just like highlights of what got you to be such a resolved and I mean I'm gonna say it, but like courageous individual. Again, I believe that you're courageous, Andrew, because you are willing to say something that you believe to be true, even when it is not popular, even when it could hurt you. That's my definition of courageous. So how did you get to be like you are? You're an interesting guy. You really are. Like, so how did you, is it just lots of life experiences? Was it lots of failures, lots of falling that you realized like, hey, I can fall and I'll be okay? Like, what kind of stuff can I pull out to just help me and then help the audience be like, wow, I would like to be a resolved, courageous person too, regardless of the hand that I was dealt.
Yeah, I mean, just for some context,
Yeah.
I'm 55 years old now. I was primarily raised by a single father, although he traveled a lot for work. So I spent a lot of time with my paternal grandmother. My family's from Mexico. I'm first generation. My cousins and I are all first generation born in the United States. I was raised in Los Angeles, California. And my paternal grandmother was a very, very strong and proud and mean woman. It would probably be just called abusive at this point. And I was her quote favorite. What that meant is I spent the most time with her. And so I was the one who was constantly, under the thumb with her. And so that from maybe age 8 or 9 to age 13 was when I spent a lot of time around my grandmother. And let's just say it was very stressful. I don't want to go into all the details, but it was very, very stressful. And so I began to act out. And so what I mean by act out is I was shoplifting and I was drinking and I was smoking marijuana. I mean, we're talking like I was a kid. Starting around 11, 12 is when I started to do these things.
Wow.
I was ditching school. I stole a car when I was 13. I was breaking into people's homes. And I mean, granted, I was just stealing their pot and their booze and their cigarettes and their chips, but that's what I was doing. I was very reckless, and of course I didn't understand at the time why I was doing it. I just thought I was, rebellious, and So I never got caught by the law, but my father was concerned about me. He spoke to my mother, and my mother thought it would be a good idea to put me into a psychiatric facility. And so I went into a psychiatric facility. I was diagnosed with something called incorrigibility, which would now be oppositionally defiant, meaning like bad kid, bad.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a
Yeah.
catch-all for just being a teenager and
Yes.
like
Yeah,
being
but
raised
I
in a
was
crazy
13.
situation.
See, I
Yeah.
was a preteen. And so what ended up happening in that situation is that I spent 3 months in the hospital, and then I spent 2 years in a group home, which was basically like a system. It was 7 homes, all girls, and then we all got bused to the same little private school, so to speak, where we went. We didn't go to any public schools. Most of us, some did. And then I went home for a month, and I couldn't hack it. The adjustment was too difficult, and I tried to take my own life. This was 15, 16 almost, and I went into another hospital, and I spent a year there. And so what ended up happening is that during that period of time, it became really obvious to me that somehow it was my fault that I was there. It was my fault that my family was struggling, and it was all on me to fix everything, fix myself, fix my family. And I started asking questions, especially in the second hospital where I was a bit older and I spent a year there. I started asking questions like, and we would be in these group therapies where there'd be all these teenagers and we'd be talking, and I'd be talking about, my grandmother, doing what she was doing, and other kids would be talking about what their parents were doing or what was happening at school with bullying or sexual abuse, in the schools. And finally one day I raised my hand and I said, why are we here? Why aren't the people who hurt us here?
Yeah, yeah. What a
That was it for
statement.
me.
Yeah.
That was a breakthrough.
Wow.
I was probably almost, I was either 15 or 16. And I thought, no, wait a minute. Why are we here? Why do we have to go through all this? Why am I the one being given these medications that make me shuffle around, like Meloril and Thorazine, right? Those are really hardcore psychotropics that just, and why was I the one being thrown into the seclusion room? Why was I the one being punished because I was misbehaving? Why was I there in the first place? And we were all struggling with, why are we here? Our parents abused us. They neglected us, left us with people who were abusive and neglectful, right? They were being raised by people who were drug addicts and people who had been they were incarcerated and now they were in foster care and they got kicked out, right? It's like, why are we there? And I think that's what set me on the road to remembering that when I was much smaller, when I was 6, I had rubella. I was given, at age 6, was given the MMR vaccination for measles, mumps, rubella. It was a bad batch. A bunch of us got really sick. I contracted, like several other kids, rubella, the German measles. That landed me in the hospital with encephalitis. I was paralyzed. There was a whole lot of medical hardship that I went through for about 2 years. And I was bullied incessantly by the kids. They would push me off my crutches, push me out of my wheelchair, call me names like retard, right? Because I ended up with learning disabilities as a result. And so that coupled with this, like, why am I here? Why am I being punished more? That's what it felt like. It felt like a continuation of being punished.
Yeah.
Those two things, I think, coupled together to make me very angry. And that anger, I used it to fuel a sense of like righteousness and indignation towards the world. And I looked for other people like me. I was already very much aware of the fact that I was lesbian at the time, and so I went mostly in that direction, looking in lesbian community. And I just found other people that were mad at the world and had injustices done to them, but were blamed for it and required to resolve it at the same time. And that I found myself becoming an activist because of that. I don't call myself an activist anymore. I'm more of an advocate. And I think for me, that's because I lost the anger. That's kind of how I differentiate. For me, the difference between activism and advocacy is when I was angry, I was an activist. I'm not angry anymore. Now I'm an advocate. And that's just, I just don't have the bandwidth for all that anger. You know, it's,
How did you get over the anger? It's very justified.
Sure. I think what I did was I realized that the holding on to the anger in an energetic sense, not the sense of thinking that this is injustice and I don't like it. Like, I still have that, but the anger, the energetic component of anger, is very debilitating.
It clouds you, right? Like, it clouds your judgment because the emotions are so strong.
It can impact. It can impact people in many different ways. It can impact people's ability to breathe properly. It can impact tension in your body, which constricts blood flow so that you're not getting enough oxygen to your organs and your brain. It can disrupt your sleep, which is very bad. It can make you overeat or undereat. There's a lot of ways in which that, or you can turn it all internal and then become depressed. And develop major depressive disorder and go on psychotropics, or become anxious. And I'm not prone to that, so I did a little bit of substances, but never was addicted. I've experienced some little bouts of like anxious response, but I don't have an anxiety disorder. I've been a bit despondent or bereaved from betrayal, but I've never been depressed or had major depressive disorder. So I'm kind of fortunate in that way that I haven't manifested those larger conditions as a result. And I think it's because partly what I did was I also channeled a lot of my energies into being in relationship. Not so healthy in my younger years because I didn't know how to do that properly.
Right.
I was raised in a divorced family. I didn't have, good role models for that, but also partly spirituality, right? Or religion. I'm more of a seeker. I'm not a joiner. So I kind of dibbled and dabbled in Unitarian Universalism and Quakerism, and I read a lot about Taoism. I studied a lot about Buddhism when I went to seminary. I have a theology degree in addition to my social work degree. So I think I anchored myself somewhat to mindfulness, which I learned at a young age. Actually, my father did. He wasn't a bad man. He was just a very busy man who traveled a lot for work. But when I was 12, he did take me to the Transcendental Meditation office to get me my mantra for my 12th birthday. So kudos to him. And he also got me involved in what's called the Human Potential Movement or self-actualization movement called EST. Earhart Systems Training. It's now called Landmark Forum. So he got me into that when I was very young. I was 10 years old. And so I think those things were really helpful. It's just hard for me to articulate in what way, because I was so young when I learned those systems that they're just sort of woven in. So I can't sort of point to the pieces. It's just part of my fabric.
But you had some tools.
I did.
You could have so easily turn just way more into the anger, burn it all down. The world is terrible. America is terrible. My life is like,
yes,
it could have gone that way. And the fact that you pulled it the other way and you're where you're at now at 55 is, it's inspiring for anyone who's been through horrible things.
It did come to the point where when I was 20 years old, I had just spent the last 2 years in a relationship with a woman who was physically and mentally abusive, was an alcoholic. I didn't grow up around drugs and alcohol, so I didn't know to recognize that. I was taken, completely off guard by that. And after 2 years, I was like, I got to get out of this. This is terrible for me. And I wrote a pro-con list. This was really a pivotal moment for me when I was 20. I put 3 options on my pro-con list: suicide, federal crime, because I knew going to a federal penitentiary was better than a state prison, because at least you had the bowling alley and the movie theater at the federal penitentiary. And also, and I'd commit a crime where it'd go to minimum security or something, or military. And thank goodness military won out. And that's when I went into the U.S. Coast Guard. And that And not initially, because at the time Coast Guard basic training was 8 weeks. I spent 10 weeks there because I got in trouble twice and got, quote, reverted back. So I ended up spending 10 weeks instead of 8 weeks in basic training. So I didn't quite get it. But by the time I repeated the third week a third time, I was all squared away and I was good to go. in typical military vernacular, squared away and good to go.
You know what, Zander? You have like the essence of like a badass, like a rebellious badass, and it seems like that's kind of like the way you've been for a while.
Yeah,
But
I call it Robin Hood bully. That's my term for it.
I like it. It's like, but what it is like is you could be a badass or like, you know, a tough guy and be a bad guy, or you could use that for good. Like guns are not the problem, swords are not the problem. It's whose hands are they in, and even like the nature of like standing up and like pushing back and like willingness to like break the law if needed be and stuff like that. All of that kind of stuff, to use that for the good guys is awesome. I mean, that's like the Dirty Harry type of like concept. And you seem to possess that.
I'm fortunate,
like, a lot.
Right? I'm 5'9", and I'm not 200 pounds, but I'm close to it, and I don't have a beer belly, right? I don't have a big gut. So I'm broad-shouldered. Yeah. So although I might not, you know, I might still be on the shorter side, so to speak, of the average man, right, who's around, you know, 6 foot, I'm still, I'm tall enough and big enough, and I also look people in the eye. I don't take any crap. And I never have taken any crap. I literally refer to that as my inner dyke. I really feel like I still have that fierceness of like being a dyke in the world. When you're a dyke in the world, that's not the same as being a lesbian, right? Who's very feminine. Like when you're a masculine woman, there is a sense in which, you know, you've got to be able to be willing and able to take on the world. And in my case, when I was 16 years old, men used to try and beat me up. Like maybe not grown men, like 20-something-year-old, right? Teenage boys, 20-something-year-old guys. I mean, one time I went into a 7-Eleven to get something to drink, and some guy pushed me, my Slurpee or whatever it was, Big Gulp, went all over the place. I had to fight this guy in the parking lot. Why? Fucking dyke. Oh, excuse me. I don't know if I should apologize.
No, yeah.
I mean, that's just ridiculous. That's the kind of experience you would have. And so there's a sense of within me that's like, I don't take any shit. And I just transferred it in. Now, of course, the issue with that is that it's okay to be a no-nonsense, take-no-shit dyke. Being a no-nonsense, take-no-shit man that looks like me, that's not so popular in certain circles, right? Because now it's toxic masculinity, or
but what you're bringing that energy to fight for good thing. I mean, you're in social work. You're not an investment banker who's going after, you know, people's retirement funds and stuff like that. So you're not using your aggression for that. You're using that like aggression, I guess you could say, or like the willingness to push back and not take shit for serving people that need help. I mean, but we need people with a big battle axe, because far too many, I think, are, you know, meek or timid, and then those people get steamrolled, or they get bullied, and they get bullied oftentimes by the very, like, you know, woke, super left social justice crew. They're bullies. A lot of them are bullies. Like, if you disagree with them,
they do use bullying tactics. To stand up
and say no is really, really important. I feel like that's something that you do.
Well, when I was, because I had been bullied as a young kid, by the time I got to middle school, I wasn't being bullied anymore, because I was not fully physically rehabilitated, but I was almost like a little Forrest Gump. I didn't have to have the leg braces or the crutches or the wheelchair anymore. I had a limp. I still have a limp, but I was able to run, and I was very fast. I was like the fastest girl runner in my school, K through 8. So I was a very fast runner. I was a big kid even then, and I started puberty at 11. So I was sort of maturing at a faster pace, and so I think what started to happen is kids recognized something in me like the littler kids or the, maybe the tubby kids, and they'd come to me and say, so-and-so's picking on me. And I remembered what it felt like to be picked on. So I'd go to the bully and I'd say, hey, I hear you're picking on so-and-so. Boom. Right?
Yeah.
Why don't you pick on me? And that would stop it. So that's why I say Robin Hood bully, because I was bullying the bullies. And so that was something that was quite admirable, because the bully was that quote unquote other, the bad kid. And now I recognize, and when I think about it, I have a lot of empathy and compassion for bullies, because bullies are traumatized kids.
Hurt people hurt people. Right?
Yes, they do. And so I recognize that. What's happening, though, is that there's one thing to recognize and have empathy for bullies. There's another to accept their behavior. And so when I now encounter, the kind of bullies that are in the adult world, it's unacceptable. Yes, you've been hurt, whether it's real or it's sometimes we just imagine a future bullying and we take on a sort of chip on the shoulder. I get it. That doesn't make the behavior of treating people like a bully okay. And so I can hold both of those things as true. And so then I find myself now, all these years later, not as much as some of my friends who are heterodox thinkers that are on social media. I am not. They get bullied incessantly. I only encounter it periodically, and I basically just ignore it or block them. I don't care about that. So it's, I don't have a brand, right? Like, I'm not in that world where I need to keep my visibility high. And so, but they're bullies are bullies. I don't care if they're part of my community or not, if they're using bullying tactics, if they're calling people names like transphobe and racist. I get called transphobic. I get called racist. I get called those things. And it's like, that's just ridiculous. It loses all sense of realism. There's like, it means nothing now. I don't even know who's a racist anymore. Like, I thought I knew what racism was and who a racist was, but if I'm being called a racist, I do not know. I don't understand it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I mess up pronouns, and I'm a transphobe now. What do you call the person that says, trans people need to die? Because you already used transphobe on me. So what? So now you're like, you're actually not serving the purpose that I think you are aiming to serve sometimes.
Yeah. There's no scale in any of this.
Yeah.
Right. There's no scale. It's like, if the person who unintentionally misgenders somebody because they've known them for years and years and years, and it's just pre-programmed into their interaction, versus a person who they just met them and they find out they're trans and they intentionally misgender because they're jerks. There's a difference, and people they treat them as the same, and it's like, that's unacceptable to me. I would never, I wouldn't even, if somebody intentionally misgendered me, I don't take issue with them. I could care less. I know who I am. I know my purpose, in life. I'm loved by my wife and, my family. Like, I'm okay. I'm good. I don't need their approval. So I'd probably just laugh at them, and walk away.
Well, that's the whole impact over intention thing. I was like, you can't do that. That's a terrible kind of metric, because obviously when you kill someone you intend to, that's different in our court system. We did an hour
and we
already.
know that, right?
Yeah.
It's like when one person takes another person's life, there's multiple crimes that you can be charged with, because we know the difference.
We know that.
We know the difference. And so, and it's based on intention.
Yeah. I know, but I don't know, but that's part of progress is just like, let's go, and then we'll see. Well, it'll sort itself out. Zander, we did an hour already. I really could talk to you forever. I think that how you've developed into being the person that you are, so resolved. You're very resolved, Zander. And I think that for young people especially, who don't know anything about the world, who don't know who they are, where they fit in, what's right, what's wrong, what's up, what's down. I think that's inspiring. And it's inspiring for me too, just to see that you've got your ducks in a row. You know who you are. You've been through hardship, and you even can categorize to make sense of this crazy hardship you've been through, so that you can see the world clearly when so few can't after being through the kinds of stuff that you've been through. It's
Well,
awesome.
I think it depends. I mean, there's so many factors, you know, we don't have time to go into it, but there's so many clinical factors that have to be taken into consideration about, like, when you have, like, you know, 4 kids that are all raised in the same family, they all have very different life experiences, but let's just say one or both of the parents was you know, an alcoholic. It's still going to impact them differently, because each child has a different temperament, and each child has different outside of the family experiences, which contribute to either the resilience or not of the person. So we have all these different pieces that impact it. So it's like at 55, you know, with my sense of resiliency, you know, I'm resolved, so to speak. But, you know, a 25-year-old doesn't have the same lived experience. So they're just starting out, or maybe even the 15-year-old. So it's like, I don't like the message. Many years back, there was this message of it gets better within the gay community, gay and LGBT community. There was this movement of it gets better, and people actually filmed videos. It gets better, it gets better. And I don't really like that sentiment, because I more believe in make it better. Find little ways to make it better. There are little ways we can make things better, even when we're forced to live under terrible situations and circumstances. We can find people who aren't terrible and spend more time with them. We can get ourselves active in activities, get involved in activities that help us build up a self-esteem, like martial arts or sports, right? A team sport. We can expose ourselves to those things if we have access to them. If we don't have access to them because somebody's really running our life, then we can befriend a teacher. We can, a school counselor, somebody, right? Not to the point where they're going to call in your parents for child welfare services, but so that we can, because what's really is happening, at least from a social work perspective, right? A lens that I look at things through would be that there's a lack of attachment, healthy attachment to a stable, loving, nurturing adult. And so it doesn't have to be the parent. It can be, and for some people, they don't find that person until they get married, right? And maybe not even then. So if we can teach young people to form healthy attachments with a teacher or a counselor or a coach, that will give them that sense of stability, and they'll learn from that person how to know the difference between right and wrong, and how to be empathetic, and how to be a leader. But they have to find that person. It only has to be one person.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And you're a teacher, so I'm sure you're that person for some of your kids.
I try to. I have lunch with one of my students every day and get to know them personally and stuff like that. So I try to, because I do, and this is a good reminder about why I'm doing that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Zander, this is awesome. Should people get into social work to close out? Like, do you think it's a good career? Because people always say, don't do it because it's doesn't pay well and it's thankless and you're
Okay. Well, there's a lot. The thing I love about social work is that it's similar to nursing in the sense that there's always jobs, and you can move around, and it's not seen as bad for your career. And the reason you want to move around is so you don't burn out, right? So you might work as a medical social worker for a few years, and then you can go off and work, at a community agency, maybe doing case management. And there's a bunch of different settings. You can work in oncology or palliative care, psychiatry. You can work out in the community. You can get licensed and become a psychotherapist or do clinical case management. You can get a special credential and go be a school social worker, right? So there's a lot of different things you can do. As far as income goes, it is true that there are better paying social work jobs than others. And so, for example, if you have a bachelor's of social work and you're a social worker for the county, you might not be making a high salary, but if you get a master's in social work, then you get promoted within the county, you're going to make more. If you go off and you do, school social work, you have to have the master's for that, right? And then you get licensed, and then, it's sort of like teachers. As you go up and up, you get more and more pay. But for people who want, I went the route of one of the best paying social work jobs ever. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I found out very quickly. I went into the federal government. So I became a social worker right out of my MSW program. My first job was with the Department of Veterans Affairs, Veterans Health Administration, with the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans program, which employs the most social workers within the VA. So we had like a social work department at my medical center, or our healthcare system, about maybe 150, like 100 of them were healthcare for homeless veteran social workers. The rest were like med surg unit and psych and spinal cord injury and things like that, right? Substance abuse. And then I went and worked for the Department of Defense with the Navy. So those are the really, really high paying. So if
sense.
anybody's inclined towards working, and when you go to work for the federal government, you can transfer around to different agencies, and you can also move around without getting burned out, without having to leave your employer, because you can go to the VA and do substance use for a couple of years, and then mental health for a couple of years, and then go into, maybe med surg unit and do discharge planning for a while. And then you can go do, HUD-VASH, which is helping the chronically homeless veterans get into permanent housing. And you can move around. The suicide prevention social work team, the caregiver support social work team. So you can move around. It's a fantastic career, especially for people who want to become licensed clinical social workers. That's required to be a long-term social worker with the federal government. You have 3 to 4 years to get licensed, but they help you with that process. They provide you with your supervision and help with continuing education and studying for your test to get licensed, all that. So if anybody's thinking about going into social work, just know that there's a lot of variety, and there's good pay if you go in the right direction towards that high pay, if that's important to you. It was important to me.
Yeah. Oh no, that's important details. You know what? I might bother you to bring you back to talk about Veterans Affairs and stuff like that, because I think the services and PTSD and all that would be lovely to get into.
Absolutely.
But Zander, thank you so much for coming on here. I hope that we will continue to keep lines of communication open, because I love talking to you, and I think that there's a wealth of knowledge that I can keep picking your brain on if you'd ever want to come back.
Absolutely. Maybe I'll even hit you up for another idea I have about another social worker and I, the one that we're working on this book together. It might be, you might find that interesting to share with your listeners.
Absolutely. We'll figure something out.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here. If people want to, do you have any public, to say you don't have social media or anything, so I don't know if people would get a hold of you for any.
No Twitter handles.
No.
I am on LinkedIn, so I do have a LinkedIn profile, and then I have a website, which is zanderkeig.net. Keig is spelled K-E-I-G. So zanderkeig.net, or my LinkedIn profile. That's
cool. And I'll put those in the links. Cool.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much. This
Beautiful,
has been really fun. I love all the places we went. It's every time I do a podcast, people go in different directions, and I really enjoy it. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and thank you. But thank you also for the work that you're doing to bring heterodox thinkers into into the arena so that people can hear us.
Thank you. I'm trying. Try.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, Zander. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Bye-bye.